Hello, I'm Mary Ito, and welcome to the CRAM podcast. You know, what we're talking about today is really a paradox when you think about it. It's something that we hate, but we also love. It's ubiquitous, it's everywhere, and even if you try and avoid it, you are drawn to it. It reaches into our most basic emotions: fear, love, sadness, joy, and desire. It has changed attitudes, sparked social trends, and impacted economies. What am I talking about? I am talking about an ad, an advertisement. And somebody who knows all about ads in the world of marketing is Terry O'Reilly, the host of CBC Radio's Under the Influence. Terry has been an ad man for over 40 years and has received hundreds of awards. He's worked with top brands like Labatt, Molson, Volkswagen, Nissan, Tim Hortons, and also top celebrities like Ellen DeGeneres, Kiefer Sutherland, Alec Baldwin, Bob Newhart, Martin Short, the list goes on. He has received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Marketing Association and was also inducted into Canada's Marketing, Advertising, PR, and Communications Hall of Fame. He's also the author of 3 books on advertising, the most recent, My Best Mistake, Epic Fails, and Silver Linings. And I am thrilled that he joins us today. Hi, Terry.
Hello, Mary. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming on. I can't believe it. Over 40 years, you've been involved in advertising. What is it that fascinates you so much about this world?
Without question, it would be that it is the study of human nature. Because nobody studies human nature, what our motivations are, what persuades us, what forces us to do things, or the way we make decisions, as advertising does. And I have found that to be endlessly fascinating.
What actually goes into a successful ad?
First and foremost, you need to do great research on your target market. You need to know exactly who you're talking to and everything you can learn about them. You need to know how the product truly fits into their life. In other words, an underarm deodorant is not going to change somebody's life. So you have to know exactly where it falls in someone's life to be genuine and realistic. Then you need a strategy to figure out how to market something in a very busy marketplace. How can you position the product in relation to all the competitors? Once you settle on that strategy, you give that to the creative department, and the writers and art directors come up with advertising ideas based on that strategy and really express that strategy creatively. And that's really, and then once the ad is made, it goes to the media department, who then places it in the right places to reach the target audience. That's really, in a nutshell, what it takes.
Yeah. You know what? Let's just say you tick off those boxes and more, right? And so, in written form, it looks like the perfect ad. But how do you know it's going to be successful, right? What's that X factor that you just don't know, or something you don't think maybe is going to be a huge hit becomes over the top?
You never know, Mary. That's really the honest answer. The X factor, like a movie, how a movie can be the biggest blockbuster of the year, and then the sequel with the same writer, same director, same actors fails. The X factor is a slippery bar of soap. And sometimes, as you say, Mary, there are ads that I have been a part of that became these huge successes. And then there were ads that I really thought were going to go nowhere and ended up being huge successes. And then there's the other ones where you think are really going to be knocked out of the park, and it's just a little like nobody really notices. So it's really, really difficult to know.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to go over some of the, what you see as being some of the best ads that were done. They were really game changers. And I wanted to start off with the first one you chose, and it's a Volkswagen ad from the 60s. Can you set it up just before we play it?
Of course. So I think this was the campaign that I think was the greatest advertising campaign of all time. This was done in New York by an advertising agency called Doyle Dane Bernbach. They landed the Volkswagen account in the late 50s. Volkswagen had already landed in North America. It wasn't doing very well. You have to imagine that what that car was at that time, which was small, ugly, underpowered, and quite frankly, a German car not long after World War II. So it had a lot of strikes going against it. And this advertising agency, DDB, Doyle Dane Bernbach, created such amazing advertising that it became the most beloved car in probably all time. And it was all because of the advertising. This is the key thing. That's why it was a landmark campaign. And I'll say one more thing before I set up this particular commercial. DDB brought humor to advertising. Prior to the VW ads of the 60s, all advertising was very serious and very sober. It was like see the USA in your Chevrolet. And then along came this very self-deprecating, very funny advertising campaign for a silly-looking little car. And the rest is history. The ad you're about to play is one of my favorites. It's called Funeral. So nobody would normally ever show a funeral in a commercial. Let's start right there, right? Because it's not where you would go.
No.
And you can imagine how many voices around the table would say, please, not a funeral, But it's a very funny commercial about somebody who loved Volkswagens, and it's a funeral procession for those who can't see the ad. They'll only hear it today, but it's a funeral procession. And in every car in the procession are different people that were related to the deceased. And then the last person in the whole long sequence of cars is in a Volkswagen. And one last little bit of trivia for those who want to find the ad on YouTube called Funeral. The person in the last car in the Volkswagen was a Canadian. He's a Canadian. He's passed away now, but he's a Canadian actor named Danny Wells. But anyway, it's called Funeral, and I love it.
Okay, we're gonna play it right now. Here goes.
I, Maxwell E. Snavely, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath the following. To my wife Rose, who spent money like there was no tomorrow, I leave $100 and a calendar. To my sons, Rodney and Victor, who spent every dime I ever gave them on fancy cars and fast women, I leave $50 in dimes. To my business partner, Jules, whose only motto was spend, 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 I leave nothing, nothing, nothing. And to my other friends and relatives who also never learned the value of $1, I leave $1. Finally, to my nephew Harold, who oft-times said, a penny saved is a penny earned, and who also oft-times said, gee, Uncle Max, it sure pays to own a Volkswagen. I leave my entire fortune of $100 billion.
I love it.
It's so good.
It's so, okay, here's the thing. That came out in the 60s. And when I saw it, we're talking 2025, I laughed. It's still funny. It's still funny.
Great, great movies and great ads. If it's a universal human insight, it'll always resonate. It'll always be funny. Even little things like the fact in that commercial, Mary, the nephew is the only one dabbing his eyes with a Kleenex.
Right.
Right? And then you see the long procession of very fancy cars, and the Volkswagen's having a hard time keeping up with them. That's such a funny little moment too, right?
It is, those little moments. And even the speaker, the elderly man who's dead, him saying, nothing, nothing, nothing. That's what he's leaving. Just the way. Do you know what? For me, I don't know how you feel, but for me, it's almost like a perfect commercial.
It is, because even though it's really entertaining and really beautifully written for the era, it's got some female references there that are of the era, of course, but it's very, very funny, and it still sells the Volkswagen as, something that people that are conscious about money, that really care about being fiscally responsible, that's the car for them, which was the strategy of Volkswagen all along.
But I love the fact that there's a big payoff, too, if you get it.
There's a big payoff.
It's kind of implied, right?
Right.
And I also love this print ad. I think it's so clever. Let's just bring it up. And I want you to talk about this ad that also came out from Volkswagen.
So the day after the moon landing, so in 1969, July 20th was a moon landing, so probably July 21st, 1969, Volkswagen took out a full-page ad in the New York Times. So a very expensive one-day ad. And what it showed is, that crazy looking lunar landing module with its 4 feet and its legs and how crazy that looked back in 69.
Yeah.
So it's a shot of the lunar landing module. And all it says in the ad is, it's ugly, but it gets you there. And then with the VW logo, that's all it says.
Yeah.
And that was part of the charm of VW, was that it made fun of itself. It knew it was an ugly car, but it said, you know what, there's something homely but lovable about it. They said in the advertising it was underpowered, but it said, but here's the great part about that. It doesn't need much gasoline. And it always made the bugs, so to speak, the bugs features. And no other car advertising in history has ever been self-deprecating. I mean, never.
But even today?
Oh, today, have you ever seen a car ad that makes fun of itself? I mean, really, there might be one out there, but as a rule, never.
That is true. Okay. So now that's interesting. If this was so successful and it took this approach, why wouldn't other car manufacturers, not all, but why wouldn't anybody follow suit?
There has been other great car advertising, Mary. It just didn't have this spark, because in that advertising agency in the 1960s was probably, I could list you endless campaigns that agency did, DDB did, that would blow your mind. It was just this moment in time where this collective of people got together. They all shared the same sense of humor. It was incredibly honest advertising. A lot of advertising puffs up the features, exaggerates a bit, but this was like, we're underpowered, we're ugly. Like they really just were sheer honesty. And most advertisers probably wouldn't go that far to point out the blemishes of their product.
Yeah. And so, did this advertising campaign, how was it reflected in sales?
Oh, it was huge. I mean, VWs for a long time became the biggest selling import car in the U.S. I mean, I don't know what the exact number is. I read it recently. It's escaping me, but something like, and don't quote me on this, but 24 million Volkswagen Beetles were sold. Something like
huge.
Extraordinary.
Yeah.
I had a 1963 Volkswagen for a long time. And it still was running. I mean, I just gave it to one of my daughters recently, but it's still running. It's 1963 and it's stock. I didn't do anything to it.
Oh, that's so good. See, I feel another commercial coming on. It's like, I can't get rid of this Volkswagen, and it's a commercial showing 50 different ways, right? You're trying to destroy it, but it still keeps running.
They did a commercial similar to that, Mary, where they showed just a flat-on shot of a Volkswagen Bug, and the headline was introducing the 1963, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68 Volt, because it never changed.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that is brilliant. Okay, moving on to your next choice. I mean, now this commercial is completely different from the Volkswagen. So talk about this one.
So when Steve Jobs was at Apple and they wanted to launch their Mac computer, which was their flagship computer in 1983, they hired an agency called Chiat Day out of Los Angeles. And this agency came up with this commercial that was so unusual that it was like nothing anyone had ever seen before. And as a matter of fact, it was so unusual that the Apple board, once they saw it, said, we're not running this commercial. And this was to be in the Super Bowl. So the Apple had already bought time on the Super Bowl. The Apple board said, we hate it. Sell the time you bought because we're not running anything. Steve Jobs loved the commercial, fought the board, offered to pay for it himself. Eventually, the board came around, even though they hated it, because it didn't even show the Mac computer in it, by the way.
Right. Yeah.
And this commercial aired one time in the Super Bowl of 1984, so it'd be February of 84. It aired one time. If you can find footage or like a moment from that football game of that, you see the commercial air, and then when they come back to the game, the announcers are stunned. The announcers, there's just silence, and they go, holy cow, did you see that commercial? Like even the announcers reacted to it at the football game. This ad not only launched the Mac, it launched Apple. because this was the foundational strategy that Steve Jobs never varied from, which was he was taking the computing power away from corporations and putting it into the hands of the individual. And this is called 1984.
Okay, let's take a look.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the Information Purification Directives. We have created, for the first time in all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests, obeying contradictory thoughts. Our unification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
Yeah, brilliant again.
Wow. So Apple's showing a dystopian future.
Yeah.
Where this woman, like an Olympic athlete, comes running in. She's the only person in color. She's wearing red and white with a Olympic hammer, and does a hammer throw and explodes the screen. That's the last explosion you hear. So here's a couple of things about that, Mary. That commercial showed it changed Super Bowl advertising for all time, because prior to that commercial, nobody made commercials specifically for the Super Bowl. Advertisers only ran their normal ads in the Super Bowl. So when that commercial happened, a epic Super Bowl commercial began as of that time. Like, that was the commercial that started all the epic Super Bowl commercials we've had since then. The second thing that makes it a landmark ad is that it changed the way us advertising people thought about television, because that commercial was directed by Ridley Scott. Yep. And it was the first time that we saw a commercial that looked like a movie. Like, we thought, oh my God, a commercial can have the production values of Hollywood. So that changed our thinking for all time.
Ridley Scott was Alien, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
He also did, by the way, the Chanel No. 5 commercial. Do you remember that great commercial, Mary, that had Share the Fantasy, the woman in the swimming pool? Yeah. That was Ridley Scott, too. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that, the whole dystopian look, and they didn't pick a man as the hero. It was a woman who threw that.
That's very true.
Very forward thinking. Yeah.
Yes, very true.
Okay. All right. So now let's get to, I love this third choice. And you actually work for this company too.
We had a client, the ad we're going to play, I didn't work on. I worked on every subsequent ad in that campaign, but I wanted to tell the story behind this first ad that kind of launched this campaign. So the agency that I worked for was called Campbell Ewald in Toronto. The biggest client we had was Fiberglas Pink Home Insulation. The client was great. In that era of the mid-'80s, Mary, directors of marketing had autonomy, which does not happen anymore. So they could make calls right in the boardroom. Yes, we're doing that. No, we're not doing it. They didn't have to bring it back to the office to get the president to approve it. They had autonomy. So the agency comes up with this wonderful idea to sell Fiberglas Pink. And the whole concept was, the strategy was, when you insulate with Fiberglas Pink, you save money. And what you do with the money you save is your business. Fiberglas Pink's business is making sure you save money. That was the whole premise. So the agency comes up with this wonderful commercial, which we'll play in a moment, called Flamingoes, where somebody saves enough money that they buy 262 beautiful pink flamingos and put them all in their tiny little front yard, just filled with flamingos. Here's the story, though, which is so interesting. The director of marketing approves it. It gets filmed. It gets put on television. The president of Fiberglass sees the commercial on television and hates it. Not only does he hate it, he calls our president at our agency and says, get that the hell off the air. That doesn't look like my company, doesn't represent my company. It's embarrassing me. I want it off the air immediately. We thought the agency thought we were going to be fired. That's how angry the president was. So then this is a Thursday when he calls. So back in the pre-internet days, you can't pull a commercial off the air quickly because you have to call every television station across the country separately. So it couldn't get pulled off the air till Monday. So the president is a Baptist-going churchgoer. He goes to services on Sunday. He's leaving the church, Mary, and the minister pulls him aside and says, "Bob, your latest Fiberglas commercial is the funniest thing I have ever seen." Monday morning, we get a phone call from the president of Fiberglas says, "Keep it on the air." Click. It was divine intervention. And as a result of that campaign, Mary, we did a whole string of commercials, and Fiberglas eventually commanded 70% of the Canadian insulation market. That's how successful that campaign was. And it almost didn't survive.
Okay, let's take a look at it. Here's the Pink Flamingos commercial.
More than 2 million Canadians have insulated their homes with Fiberglas Pink. Here's what one particular couple did with the money they saved.
We saved enough to buy 252 beautiful pink flamingos.
262, Walter.
I stand corrected. Notice that all of their beaks are a beautiful hue of yellow.
What you do with the money you save is your business. Our business is making sure you do save money. Fiberglas Pink Home Insulation. Do it for the money you save.
Again, humor. And again, like the Volkswagen, kind of a boring thing, like a boring product.
It's funny you say that because the client's brief to us was, and I'll always remember this, he said to us, "I sell the world's most boring product. Make me famous," which is such a funny challenge, right?
It is. Okay, so as an ad man, when you hear something like that, is that just like, oh, candy? Like you can hardly wait to sink your teeth into it and do something with it?
You're only as good as your client. So you have to sense from your client if there's a real, genuine opportunity there. I once was approached on a different campaign for one moment. The Toronto Symphony Orchestra came to my company saying, "We need to attract a younger audience because, our older audience is passing away and we need to, refresh the audience." The director of marketing came to see me, Mary, and he looked like he was out of central casting. He was beautifully dressed, older, distinguished gentleman, silver hair, beautiful voice, British accent, exactly what I would imagine the director of marketing for the symphony would be. Symphonies are very conservative by nature. So he briefs us on this, and I'm thinking, okay, I'll do my best with this. And as he's putting on his coat, he has one foot out the door of our office. He turns around and he looks at me and he says, "Oh, and by the way, blow the dust off this place." And that's the moment I knew it was a huge opportunity. It wasn't the briefing itself. It was that little moment on the way out. And when the Fiberglas client said, "I sell the most boring product in the world, make me famous," we knew it was an opportunity.
Yeah. Do you know, I wonder when it comes to some ads that become game changers, and I actually think about it, it was a recent commercial and you wrote an article on it. It was Burger King. And Burger King's commercial shows this burger that becomes moldy over time, right? And, I watch that. And of course, I'm just like, what's going on? Which I'm sure everyone does the first time they see it, right? Because it puts, I guess, the whole notion of like, oh, well, if you're going to advertise food, it should be shown as fresh and delicious and so appealing. Then along comes this commercial that really, it turns that whole idea on its head.
It's true. It was a disruptive commercial because, as you're right, all food marketing is about taste appeal. And here was a burger that was actually disintegrating, going moldy in real time. But the idea was that it had no artificial ingredients, because a burger with artificial ingredients never disintegrates, where that one didn't. So it did. I mean, the whole point was freshness in a weird way.
And it actually worked, didn't it?
Yes, it was a huge success.
You see, so, Terry, with campaigns, like that, where you take sort of an existing trend, but you say, no, we're going to totally invert that. To me, wouldn't that be a hard sell? Like I could just see going into the boardroom or you're talking to the company and they're like, what? Moldy burger? Are you crazy?
The biggest ideas are the toughest sells by far. A safe idea is the easiest sell in the world. And then something bold is the toughest sell in the world. And that's why, as an advertising person, you have to learn to become a great presenter, because so many great ideas die in the boardroom. So I was lucky because I had a great mentor. My creative director on the Fiberglas business was a great presenter. He just owned the room when he was in the boardroom. And I watched him and he taught me how to sell an idea. And I was very lucky because most people never get that kind of mentorship, because it all comes down to how well you present it. Because if you're a bad presenter, a bad idea dies.
Yeah. Okay. So for you, what was the toughest idea to sell?
We did an ad, television ad, which is on YouTube somewhere, called Puck Sandwich for the Hockey Hall of Fame. I have never sold a commercial as hard as that one. And it ended up being a huge, wonderful thing for the Hockey Hall of Fame. But it was this, they had a new exhibit that was interactive and they wanted to try and attract kids, because if kids wanted to go, they'd bring their dads. And the problem the Hockey Hall of Fame has is it's all retired players. So kids have no interest in it yet. So we had this silly little idea where someone went up to a display at the Hockey Hall of Fame, pressed a button, and then he got hit in the face with pucks for like 20 seconds. And then at the end, it just said, "Welcome to the Johnny Bower exhibit." Now, of course, which is funny, right?
Yeah.
Of course, they didn't have that exhibit. So the Hockey Hall of Fame's like, "We don't have that exhibit." I'm like, "I know that you don't have it, but everybody will understand. It's just having fun with the interactivity of your news section." Anyway, I had to sell it to the director of marketing, and then to the president, and then to the board of directors. Like, I must have presented that ad, Mary, 7 times, full out presentations before anybody. And then at the end of the day, they just threw up their hands and said, okay. And then it ended up being this really wonderful, very funny, very effective commercial, but it almost killed me.
You just wore them down, Terry.
I did, because I believed so strongly in the idea.
Oh, God, I mean, you showed us 3 commercials that were real game changers. If you think about other ads that have been successful, that maybe, they started like a social trend, say, or they actually moved people to take some kind of action, right? Or they had some kind of significant impact. What comes to mind?
Ooh, that's a good question, because there have been many great campaigns like that. I'll say this. In the States right now, there is a lot of incredible work being done against the gun problem in the States. It is, when I sit back and I watch the work they're doing down there, you don't see it up here, but you would see it down there. It is so powerful. I think it had a big part to do with the fact the NRA is crumbling right now. It's really, I think, it's due to many things, but a big part of it is the incredible work they're doing to get people to take a stand against gun ownership in the U.S., which is a very tough issue down there. Mm-hmm. But it's so powerful that it's unbelievable. And
are they running ads? What are they doing?
Yes, it's mostly videos. I mean, the new world is really videos on YouTube. I mean, and it's a great thing because you're not confined to 30 seconds anymore. You can literally tell a great 2-minute story now, which in my day, we never had that opportunity. Everything had to fit into 30 seconds. So we're seeing really great work down there. I'll tell you one ad they did really quickly. They invited the ex-president of the NRA to come and give a commencement speech at a school. So he came the day before to practice, and in front of him were all these empty white chairs, and he practiced his whole speech, and they filmed it. But the thing was, that school didn't exist. And the school, I'm forgetting the name of it, Mary, but it was named after the President of the United States that put the Second Amendment into the Constitution. And when they put the video out, and the ex-president of the NRA complained that he had been tricked and that he couldn't believe they had done that to him, what the association, the parents who were behind that said, well, you should have done a background check.
Oh, brilliant.
Like, so good, Mary, right? Just
Wow.
so, because it was all about doing background checks on guns, right?
Yeah.
He hadn't done his homework.
Exactly. Is that on YouTube?
Yes.
Can people see that? Oh,
yes. I wish I could tell. I can't remember what the ad's called, but it will only take you like 2 or 3 searches to find it.
You know, the other thing that crossed my mind too when I was watching those commercials, you know, I'm here in Canada, in North America, and those commercials, they all spoke to me, you know, the ones that you chose. And I just wondered, like today, how difficult or easy is it to create one ad that you can then use, you know, in many different countries? So it goes across cultures, it goes across, you know, social and economic differences. Like, is that a difficult thing to do today or not?
That's a very good question. I would say that there's a way to do it, of course, which is if there's very little dialogue in the commercial. You know how Mr. Bean travels around the world because there's no words in Mr. Bean, right? That's one way to do it. The other way is to do a very simple commercial that even when you change the language of it, it still works. But I would say it's difficult. But I would also say at the same time, the world is much more homogenous now. Like we all, because of the internet, we all see the same things. Like I always have to laugh when I'm in a group and someone says, "What time is it?" And we all have the exact same time on our phones. Like we're not 1 minute off. We're exactly right. And so that makes it on one hand tougher and on the other hand easier because the world is really one big place now instead of 1,000 separate places. Yeah.
And I also just wondered too, because, you know, over time, much of the world has become westernized, you know, many parts Americanized. Consumer culture is like rampant. And then I also thought, well, does it also have to be, you know, one commercial or more homogeneous because of costs? Because you just can't afford to have, you know, 100 different commercials going around.
That's exactly right, too. There is a definite cost efficiency when you're doing. I mean, a part of your job as an ad person in Canada, not more so in past years, is taking an American ad and Canadianizing it. So just, you know, changing a little bit of the dialogue or changing a particular shot in the commercial. So there is a big part of that where American companies just run the same ads here. But there's a lot to be said for advertisers that take their time to do commercials aimed at a specific market, that they don't in fact do that. They actually have an agency in that market who knows that market, understands the nuances of that market, and creates advertising accordingly.
You bring up an interesting point when you said about an American commercial and then it's Canadianized. Given the times we live in right now, you know, and the tensions between the U.S. and Canada, how likely is it that companies will try and capitalize on that? You know, because for example, right, I go to the grocery store and already, you know, I've seen the Maple Leaf sticker on products, right, to show that they're Canadian. So I'm just wondering, like, is that this is a great opportunity. We are going to do something about this to show our Canadian roots.
Oh, I think I'm seeing it already. I think we're going to see a lot of that in advertising, not just in the grocery store, but in advertising saying we're Canadian. You know, look for our label with the maple leaf on it. Even our podcasts, Mary, we have started putting a little red maple leaf on our podcasts because when you go to the podcast charts, they're dominated by American shows. The Canadian podcast charts are dominated by American shows. And people are looking for ways now to identify Canadian products, right? So what we've started to do, and we're trying to get all other Canadian podcasters to do the same, which is to put a little tiny red maple leaf on their cover art. So when people go to the podcast charts, they can know at a glance whether something's Canadian.
Oh, wow. That is okay. That's interesting. I'm going to do it.
If you go to our site right now, if you go to Under the Influence right now on iTunes or Apple, wherever, you'll see it. You'll see the red maple leaf in the corner of my cover art.
Okay, you know what? I also want to talk about, because we talked about successful campaigns. There have also been a lot of disasters. And I want you to bring up just a couple of examples of ones of note that really stand out for you.
There was a recent one that I talked about on a recent show. So Wicked, the movie, is all the rage right now. And it was all the rage on Broadway for years and years. So Mattel put out a line of singing dolls for kids. And on the packaging, instead of wickedmovie.com, it said wicked.com. Now, wicked.com is a porn site. So it was a huge mistake. So
No kidding.
Mattel, you can only imagine. I mean, Mattel was trying to backpedal. The product was already in stores. And they put out a thing saying, please obscure the URL from don't let your children see the URL. Like, it was this disaster for Mattel.
Oh my
And then it ended
goodness.
up in a class action lawsuit from a bunch of parents in the US where their kids had in fact gone to the porn sites and were traumatized. So, that shows you Mattel's a big company. It's not like a little company made a mistake. That's a big company. And what's strange about that, Mary, is in the advertising world, in the marketing world, I can tell you that anything, an ad, a print ad, a product packaging goes through so many hands and so many eyes before it goes out into the marketplace that it's shocking that something like that could sneak through.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you wrote a whole book about mistakes, right?
Yes.
And then not all mistakes are bad. Like, tell us an example, of a mistake that actually ended up as a success.
Well, the first chapter in my book is about Jaws, the movie, because, and it's a well-told story except for one little part of it. So as you know, Steven Spielberg's a young director. He gets his first shot at his first big movie. It's Jaws. He insists on making 3 life-size sharks, anatomically correct, that can move certain ways. And he brings them out. He tests them in big water tanks in Hollywood, and they're great. He brings them out to Martha's Vineyard where he's shooting the movie. He puts the shark in the water. He's got his whole crew there. He's got his cast there. Puts the shark in the water, and it malfunctions immediately. And the problem was, this is the part that not a lot of people know, is he made a huge mistake. He didn't test it in salt water. He tested it in fresh water. So the salt water instantly corroded all the mechanics of the shark. So there he is sitting in Martha's Vineyard in his hotel room in the dark, panicking. Because the star of the movie, that's in almost every scene originally, the shark is not functioning. So he sits there and he's panicking. And then he asks himself this one question, which was so interesting. He said to himself, what would Hitchcock do? And in that moment, Mary, he realized that what you can't see is the scariest thing of all.
Oh.
So he completely rewrote the script so that you don't see the shark till the end of the film. And he only implied the shark with the great soundtrack from John Williams, or just seeing the tail fin or the dorsal fin. Like, you never really saw the shark till the end of the movie. And that decision made that movie a blockbuster. It was the best mistake he could have possibly made.
I did not know that. I didn't know that story. That is so interesting. Do you know, is that idea of not showing but implying, is that commonly used in commercials? Because that is brilliant when you think of it, right? It is the imagination. You can't beat our imagination.
Well, the Apple was an example of that because the computer was never shown in that commercial.
Yeah.
It was the implied thing that the future was not going to be dystopian. So I'd say it's rare. Mostly you have commercials where the product is front and center. But when handled well, you can do it. It can be done.
What do you think, Terry? Again, being in advertising for over 40 years, like, what do you think has been the biggest change or changes that you've seen in that time?
It's been the arrival of digital and social media and the internet. I mean, that has changed everything. Prior to all of that arriving, it was a one-way conversation from advertisers. You put out an ad and there was no feedback. Or if there was feedback, someone would have to write a letter, find an envelope, find a stamp, walk to the mailbox, and then never hear from the company again. Now we get a front row seat to see how companies respond to criticism from customers, because it's all on X, it's all on Instagram, it's all on Facebook. We get to see it. So that was a huge change in the world, without question.
Do you think, generally speaking, like I know this is probably not an easy question or question to answer, but do you think it's more difficult to create a successful commercial today? And I mean success in the terms like a Volkswagen success, that or Fiberglas pink success.
I do. I mean, on one hand, it's a very exciting time, Mary, because there are so many ways to reach the biggest audience. For example, that Fiberglas pink spot back in 1985 may not have reached the same audience that someone could reach on Instagram right now. So that's the upside. The downside is that it's a very fractured media world out there. On the other hand, meaning there's how many social media platforms are there? Instagram, Pinterest, Facebook, X. Like there's and then there's streaming services that have no commercials. I even find myself spending lots of time on streaming services with no commercials, and I have to sort of, get back to my commercial world in order to have content for my show. It's so easy to avoid advertising now. So I think it's tougher in a way to have those out of the park successes that used to be easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also wonder too whether anything you put out there, you're going to offend somebody today.
Oh yeah. I mean, even Mary, even having a radio show, you offend people just by, what you say. And although we get mostly great emails from our listeners, I get ones that people just don't like. Here's an interesting, the email I've been getting for 20 years, which is perennial, which makes me laugh every time I get it, is this: Terry, love your show, still hate advertising, love your show. Which is so funny to me. But I think what it proves is people don't hate advertising, they hate bad advertising.
Yeah.
And the problem is most advertising's bad. But the good stuff, the stuff I talk about on our show, is really smart and really respectful, and you really want to see it again. And as you said, Mary, it can still make you smile 20 years later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think the biggest lessons are that you've learned about this field?
It's very hard to do it well. It is very, very hard to do it well. There's also the reality of being in the trenches as a creative person is you have to pump out ideas every day. And it is a business of rejection because clients turn you down all the time, or your work is turned down inside the agency before it even gets to the client. So you really have to develop a thick skin. But at the end of the day, as I said when I think we began talking today, it's the study of human nature. And that is just so utterly fascinating to me 40 plus years later. I never get tired of learning. I learn every day still after all these years. But if you can find an insight, if you can find even that, what you can save money insulating with fiberglass pink, and what you do with the money you save is your business. Just also live that little foot in the door. If you can find that, then the creativity can be endless. In other words, like in that fiberglass campaign, we did all sorts of commercials off that same premise because the premise was so rich. But it's so hard to do it well. So hard. Yeah.
So, here we are in 2025. What will you be watching for, not just in this year, but, in the future, as far as maybe changes in the way we approach advertising? What are you going to be watching for?
I think AI is the big topic right now. The Coca-Cola Christmas commercial. So Coke does a big Christmas commercial every year. It's one of their biggest ads of the year. This year's was all done by AI. So there were no human fingerprints on this ad at all. So it was conceived by AI, executed by AI, So there were no actors in it. And it went out on the air. It was very polarizing. Some people were amazed by it. Other people just hated it. A lot of people hated it because it was AI. But I think that'll be the big story moving forward is what does that mean for advertising? Does that mean that creative departments will disappear? Does that mean actors will start losing all sorts of jobs? Will it be a good thing in some way that I can't fathom right now? I think that's the big story is I want to do a show on AI, Mary, and as an experiment, I had AI replicate my voice on a page that I wrote. And I heard it back and I was stunned at how good it was. And I played it for my wife and she didn't know it wasn't me.
Oh, that's scary.
That's the scary part of AI, right? It's so good already.
Yeah. Yeah. Wait till there's a physical double like you, Terry.
I know. Yeah, I know. A doppelganger walking by me on the street. I know.
Okay, last thing, because I don't want to let you go without talking about your next book, which sounds very exciting. So just brief us on that because it's coming out in the fall.
It's called Against the Grain, and it's about people who went against conventional theory and conventional thinking. And I went against the status quo to such an extent that most of the people I write about got drummed out of their professions. But at the end of the day, every single one of them was right. The idea they had, the disruptive idea they had was the right idea, and they were proved right. Some of them got proved right and got to enjoy that. Some of them died before their idea was really realized as the breakthrough it was. But all of these people that I write about really bravely and courageously went against the status quo to the point where they literally lost their careers. But we're right.
Oh. Wow. That sounds like another great book. I loved speaking with you today, Terry. Thank you so much for your time. And also congratulations on your 20 years of Under the Influence at CBC Radio.
Thank you so much. It's been an endless joy.
Thanks a lot, Terry.
Thanks, Mary.
That's Terry O'Reilly, award-winning ad man, broadcaster, author. He's the host of Under the Influence, celebrating, as you heard, 20 seasons on CBC Radio. Also the author of 3 books, 4 coming up in the fall on advertising. And his most recent is called My Best Mistake, Epic Fails and Silver Linings. That's it for the show today. Hope you enjoyed it. For more on Terry and his work, please check out our show notes. We've got links. And to keep up to date on the CRAM podcast, you can follow us on social. Our handle is @CRAM Ideas. And if you like what you hear, please consider a donation. We are a charity and rely on your financial support. You can donate at cramideas.com. Thanks for listening and see you back here next time.